The day my brother got married, I sat at table 14. I want you to understand what that means. The reception hall had 15 tables. Table 14 was next to the kitchen door. Every time a server pushed through, I got a wave of dish soap smell and the clatter of plates being stacked. My brother had arranged the seating himself. He told me this proudly, 2 weeks before the wedding, standing in my mother's kitchen while she ironed his dress shirt. I did the whole chart, he said. Took me 3 hours. He didn't look at me when he said it. I found my name on the little ivory card and sat down without making a scene. That's the thing about being the quiet one. You get very good at not making scenes. My name is Serena. I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house that smelled like my mother's pot roast and my father's shoe polish, and underneath everything, a kind of low-grade anxiety that nobody ever named. My brother's name is Kevin. He's 5 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand the difference, I understood that Kevin was the one our parents talked about at dinner parties, and I was the one they mentioned as an afterthought. Kevin played baseball. Kevin got a partial scholarship to Ohio State. Kevin got hired at a regional accounting firm right out of college and bought a house at 27 and drove a clean American truck and called my mother every Sunday without being asked. I dropped out of pre-med after 1 semester because I couldn't stop thinking about a different problem. That's the simplest way I know to say it. I was 19, sitting in a biochemistry lecture, and my mind kept drifting to something I'd been working on since high school. A way to match students with tutors using behavioral data instead of just subject tags. Not what a student said they needed, what they actually demonstrated they needed based on how they worked through problems. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd sit in the library until it closed, not studying for my classes, just building the model in my head and then on paper and then in code on a second-hand laptop I'd bought with babysitting money. I tried to explain it to my father at Thanksgiving break. He listened for about 45 seconds and then said, "But what's the degree in?" When I told him I was leaving pre-med, he didn't yell. That would have been easier. He just got very quiet and said, "I hope you know what you're doing," in a tone that made absolutely clear he didn't think I did. My mother cried. Not dramatically. She cried the way she did when she was trying not to, small, controlled, wiping her eyes with a dish towel while she stood at the sink. She said, "Serena, what are we supposed to tell people?" That was the part that stayed with me. Not, "Are you okay?" Or "What do you need?" Or even explain it to me again, slower. What are we supposed to tell people? I transferred to a state school, studied computer science, finished in 3 years, and moved to Austin. I told my parents I was working in tech. That was true. I did not tell them I was working on my own company because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. I knew my father would forward me articles about startup failure rates. I knew my mother would call Kevin, and Kevin would call me and say something like, "Siri, come on, be realistic," in that voice he had. That gentle, reasonable, older brother voice that always made me feel like I was 7 years old and he was doing me a favor by talking to me at all. So I didn't tell them. I worked. God, I worked. I had a studio apartment with a window that looked directly into the brick wall of the next building, and I kept the blinds open anyway because I needed the light, even if it was just reflected off concrete. I ate a lot of rice and beans and eggs. I had one good interview jacket that I wore to every meeting and dry cleaned once a month. My co-founder, a woman named Britt who I'd met in a hackathon in Austin, used to bring me coffee when she could tell I'd been up all night, and she'd set it on my desk without saying anything, just a small, quiet kindness that I still think about. Britt believed in what we were building. That mattered more than I can explain, because for a long time she was the only person outside the two of us who did. The product was called Pathline. It was an adaptive learning platform that matched students, K through 12, with tutors and curricula based on demonstrated learning patterns, not self-reported needs. The algorithm got smarter the more it was used. We built it lean, we tested it obsessively, we revised it constantly. We got a small seed round from an Austin-based investor named Warren Chen when Pathline was 18 months old, and that was the first time I paid myself an actual salary. And I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building, and cried for about 10 minutes because I had been running on fumes and terror for so long that a paycheck felt like someone had finally confirmed I existed. I didn't tell my family about the funding. I kept telling myself I'd tell them when there was more to tell, when it was undeniable, when it was the kind of news that couldn't be minimized or questioned or reformatted into a reason to worry. Meanwhile, Kevin got promoted. Kevin got engaged to a woman named Ashley who was perfectly nice and organized and who sent my parents a custom photo calendar every Christmas with pictures of their dog. Kevin bought a bigger truck. Kevin and Ashley set a wedding date for the following September. My mother called me every few weeks. The calls had a pattern. She'd ask how I was doing. I'd say fine. She'd tell me what Kevin was up to. She'd mention some cousin or neighbor who had just achieved something conventional and legible, got into law school, made partner, had a baby, and then she'd circle back to me, tentative, like she was approaching something that might bite her. Are you seeing anyone? Are you thinking about coming home? Are you still doing that computer thing? That computer thing. I was 30 at the time. Pathline had just signed a contract with the Chicago public school system. I said yes, I was still doing that computer thing. She said, "Well, I'm sure it's fine, honey." Kevin's wedding was in September, a Saturday, at a venue outside Columbus, a restored barn on someone's property, which is its own kind of achievement in Ohio, finding a barn and convincing it to become elegant. Ashley had done a beautiful job. White lights everywhere, big arrangements of wildflowers, a string quartet for the ceremony. I flew in on Friday night and stayed at my parents' house, and my mother fed me pot roast and asked me if I was eating enough and didn't ask a single question about my work. My father shook my hand when I came in. He's not a hugger. He said, "Good flight?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Good," and went back to the television. Kevin was in a great mood all weekend. He had the easy warmth of a person whose life was progressing exactly as expected. He hugged me at the rehearsal dinner and said, "Glad you made it, Sari." And I knew he meant it. And I also knew that was the end of any real conversation we'd have. He was busy. He was the center of everything. That was fine. It was his wedding. But then I found my name at table 14, and something in me went very still. I sat down. I introduced myself to the other people at the table. Two of Ashley's coworkers, an older couple who were distant relatives of someone, a young guy who'd come alone and spent most of dinner on his phone. The kitchen door swung. Plates clattered. The string quartet, which had been lovely during the ceremony, was now barely audible from where I sat. I watched my parents at table 2, up near the front, near the wedding party. My mother was laughing at something Kevin's father-in-law had said. My father was sitting very straight, the way he did when he was proud and trying not to show how proud he was. I drank my water. I ate my chicken. I did not make a scene. And then the speeches started. Kevin's best man went first. The standard stories about college and how Kevin had once driven 4 hours to help him move an apartment and what a stand-up guy he was. Sweet. Sincere. Then Ashley's maid of honor, who cried in the charming way bridesmaids are supposed to cry. Then Kevin himself, who talked about Ashley and how she'd made him better, and he got emotional. And I believed him, because Kevin has always had the ability to feel things in real time in a way I've never quite managed. Then my father stood up. He hadn't told me he was speaking. Nobody had mentioned it. He stood up with his glass and the microphone and he talked about Kevin. He talked about how Kevin had always known who he was, had always been steady, had always made the family proud. He talked about Ashley and how lucky Kevin was to have found someone who understood what really mattered. He said, "When I look at my son, I see a man who built something real." He sat down. The room applauded. I looked at my water glass. I thought about the Chicago School District contract. I thought about the 400,000 students currently using Pathline. I thought about the meeting I had scheduled for the following Thursday with a venture capital firm in San Francisco. I thought about the thing I had been quietly building for 6 years while sitting at tables like this one. I thought, he doesn't know. And then I thought, he didn't ask. The Thursday meeting in San Francisco was with a firm called Lakeview Capital. They were known for edtech investments. A few of their portfolio companies had gone public, and they'd had one very notable exit the previous year that everyone in the space was talking about. Britton and I had prepared for 8 weeks. We knew our numbers in our sleep. We knew our user growth curves and our retention data, and our unit economics and our churn rates, and what we were going to do differently in the next 18 months and why. The lead partner at Lakeview was a man named Garrett Moss. He had the specific energy of someone who had heard 1,000 pitches and been right often enough to trust his own boredom as a signal. He was not bored during our pitch. I watched his face and I could see the moment something shifted. About 12 minutes in, when I showed him the retention data from the Chicago district, how students who used Pathline for more than 8 weeks showed measurable improvement in self-directed learning behaviors, not just test scores. He leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. That's the metric everyone says they're going for, he said. Nobody actually has it. We have it, I said. We closed a Series B round of $42 million 4 months later. I paid off my student loans the week the wire cleared. I sat in the same car, in the same parking lot, and I did not cry this time. I just sat there for a while in the quiet. I still didn't tell my family. I know that sounds extreme. I know it sounds like I was punishing them. I thought about it a lot since, and I don't think that's what it was. I think I was protecting something, the version of me that had built this, the version that had worked in a studio apartment with a brick wall view and dry cleaned one jacket and eaten rice and beans, and kept going. She had done it entirely without their belief. Their belief wasn't part of the structure. And I was afraid that if I told them, their reaction, whatever it was, skepticism or sudden hollow pride, would do something to how I understood what I'd built. Like if they touched it, it would change shape. So I waited. I waited another 14 months. The thing about timing is that eventually it stops being a choice. Britt called me on a Tuesday in late spring. It was 7 in the morning her time, and she was already in the office, which told me everything before she said a word. Britt was not a 7 in the morning person unless something was happening. Garrett called, she said. They want to talk about a path to IPO. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why, I just sat down on the floor with my back against the cabinet and my coffee getting cold next to me. How serious? I said. He used the word timeline, Britt said. He used it 3 times. We talked for 2 hours. Then I called our legal team. Then I called Garrett. The conversation was 45 minutes long, and by the end of it there was a plan in place. Preliminary, contingent on a dozen things, but real. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up. Then I called my mother. I want to be honest about why I called her when I did. It wasn't purely to share good news. It was also because, and this is harder to say, I had spent years waiting for a version of her that might meet me where I was, and I still hadn't stopped hoping that version existed. I think that's the thing about family that nobody tells you. The hope doesn't go away just because the evidence argues against it. You just carry it around, quieter over time, but still there. She answered on the 3rd ring. She sounded happy to hear from me, the way she always did, and for a second, I almost backed out. Almost said, never mind, how are you? Tell me about the garden. But I didn't. Mom, I said, I need to tell you something about my work. There was a small pause. I could hear her settle into a chair. I started a company 6 years ago, I said. An education technology company. It's called Pathline. We help students learn better. We use data to match kids with the right resources at the right time. We have contracts with several major school districts. We just closed our 2nd round of funding. Another pause. How much? She said. Finally, $42 million, I said. The silence lasted a long time. Serena, she said. Yeah. Why didn't you tell us? And I thought about all the things I could say. I thought about the biochemistry lecture and the Thanksgiving dinner and the pot roast and the photo calendar and table 14. I thought about what are we supposed to tell people, and I hope you know what you're doing, and are you still doing that computer thing? I wanted to be sure first, I said. I'm sure now. She told my father. He called me that night. He said, your mother told me about your company. Just like that, flat, like he was confirming information. Yes, I said. 42 million, he said. Yes. There was a long pause. My father is not a man who apologizes directly. I knew that going in. So what he said next was, in its way, as close as he's ever come. I didn't understand what you were doing, he said. I should have asked more questions. I said, yeah. He said, well. And then he was quiet again. I said, I know, Dad. And we stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes talking about almost nothing. The weather in Columbus, a plumbing issue he'd been dealing with, whether I was getting enough sleep, and that was the conversation. That was what it looked like. Kevin called 3 days later. He was friendly about it, the way Kevin is friendly about most things. He said, so Mom told me. That's wild, Sari. 42 million? Seriously? And he laughed in that easy way he had, and I couldn't quite tell, and maybe still can't, whether the laugh was genuine or whether it was covering something else. I said yes. He said, why didn't you ever say anything? I said, you know how the family gets about things they don't understand? There was a pause, and I could tell he was deciding whether to push back on that, and then he decided not to. He said, fair, and moved on. We talked for a while. It was fine. It was the most real conversation we'd had in years, and it was still not quite real. The IPO process took 18 months. I don't have a tidy way to describe it because it wasn't tidy. It was due diligence and S1 filings and roadshow preparation and conversations with bankers who used language that was technically English and practically a different language entirely. Britt handled the operational side. I handled the investor relations. We divided and conquered the way we always had. My parents knew by then. I told them more, gradually. The IPO process, what it meant, roughly what the valuation range looked like. My father started reading about EdTech. He sent me an article once from the Wall Street Journal about adaptive learning platforms. He wrote a 3-word email, thought of you. I read it 6 times. My mother called more often. She asked better questions. Not always the right ones, but better. She asked what Pathline actually did, and I explained it again, and this time she listened all the way through and said, so you figured out how to see what a kid needs before they know they need it. And I said, yes, that's basically it. And she said, that's a good thing to do. It wasn't a lot, but it was something. The morning Pathline went public, I was in New York. I'd been there for 2 weeks for the roadshow, and Britain had flown in, and our CFO, James, had barely slept, and we were all running on coffee and adrenaline and a very specific kind of fear that lives right next to excitement and is almost impossible to tell apart. The opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange is louder than you expect. I know that sounds like a small thing, but it hit me physically. The bell rang and the board lit up, and Pathline started trading, and James grabbed my arm and said something I couldn't hear over the noise. I looked at the number. The IPO priced at $28 per share. We opened at 37. By end of day, we were at 41. I went back to the hotel and sat in my room for a while and tried to feel the size of it, and I mostly couldn't. It was too large for the feeling I kept reaching for. I called Britt and we said a lot of things that didn't quite cover it. I called my lawyer. I called James. Then I called my father. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. My father, who is not a waiter, who is not someone who sits by the phone. Dad, I said. I saw, he said. It's on the news. Yeah, I said. He made a sound I couldn't quite identify. Not a word. Just a sound, somewhere between a breath and something else. I'm proud of you, he said. 4 words. He said them quietly like he was testing their weight. I sat with that for a second. I said, thanks, Dad. And I meant it. I want to be clear about that. I meant it. Even knowing what I know about the years behind us, even knowing that this was at least partly the pride of proximity, the pride of having a daughter whose name was now in the news. I think both things can be true. I think he was also genuinely proud in a way he hadn't known how to be before, because he hadn't understood before, and now he understood. Understanding isn't the same as what I needed when I needed it. That's the thing I've had to sit with. The apology that comes after the proof is a different thing than the belief that comes before it. But it's something. It's not nothing. Kevin texted me that night. Just, Sari, holy sh*t. Call me when you can. I called him the next day. The news kept saying the valuation, he said. Is that real? Like that's your actual… Yeah, I said. That's real. He laughed. Then he went quiet. Then he said, I'm sorry, Sari. I said, for what? He said, for the wedding seating. For all of it. I didn't. He stopped. I didn't take you seriously. I should have. I've thought about what to say to that a lot. What the right response is, whether you accept it graciously or whether you let someone sit in it a little longer. I know, I said. Thank you for saying that. We talked for an hour. It was the best conversation I'd ever had with my brother, and it was also 6 years late. And both of those things are true at the same time. I went home to Columbus for Christmas that year. My mother made pot roast. My father sat very straight at the dinner table and told me, in his limited way, things about the business section of the paper he'd been reading. Kevin and Ashley brought their dog. Ashley had made a photo calendar again. But this year, there was a photo of me in it. A screenshot of the Pathline IPO coverage, printed and cropped and fitted into the month of October. She'd done it quietly without making a thing of it, and when I saw it, I had to look away for a second. We ate. We talked. The dog barked at the kitchen timer. My father made a joke, a rare event, and everyone laughed maybe a little too hard because it was so unexpected. Nothing was fixed, exactly. That's not how it works. The years don't disappear because the ending turned out a certain way. My mother still sometimes asks questions that tell me she doesn't quite understand what I do. And my father still struggles with directness, and Kevin and I are still building something that got a late start. But I'm building it. I think that's the answer, in the end. Not that the story resolved cleanly, not that I got the apology in the exact form I needed, or that the people who underestimated me became different people overnight, but that I kept building anyway, and now we're all trying, and that's what trying looks like in real families. Imperfect and slow and sometimes happening years after it should have. I sat at table 14. I built a company that went public at a valuation that made the national news. I did not do it to prove something to them. I did it because I couldn't stop thinking about the problem. Because I believed the idea was real before anyone else did. Because Britain believed in it too. And that was enough to keep going. The proof came later. The belief was always mine. I've been asked a few times since the IPO, by journalists, by people who reach out online, by a reporter who framed it as a redemption story, whether I feel vindicated, and I never quite know how to answer that because vindication implies I was waiting for someone else to confirm something. I wasn't, or at least by the end I wasn't. Here's what I've come to understand about how things actually work. The world doesn't respond to what you wish were true about yourself. It responds to what you do, consistently, over time, when no one is paying attention and no one is applauding and the kitchen door is swinging and you can smell dish soap from the last table in the room. That's where the real thing gets built, not in the moment of the reveal, but in all the ordinary moments that make the reveal possible. My brother sat me at table 14 because he had a picture of me in his head that was years out of date. He saw the girl who left pre-med, who moved to Texas for a computer thing, who never had a conventional answer when people asked what she did for work. And the truth is, I let him keep that picture because I wasn't building Pathline for his approval. I was building it because I couldn't not build it. Because the problem kept pulling at me and I had a genuine belief, based on real evidence, that I could solve it. That's the only reason that holds up over 6 years of rice and beans, and one good interview jacket and brick wall windows and early mornings, and the specific loneliness of working on something that most people in your life don't understand. What I think about now, what I come back to when I think about Serena at 24 versus Serena at 31, is that integrity isn't something you perform for an audience. It's what you do when the audience isn't there. When my father didn't ask, when my mother worried, when Kevin called me Siri in that gentle tone that meant he thought I was making a mistake, I didn't collapse, and I didn't go prove them wrong exactly. I just kept going back to the work, that consistency, that refusal to be diverted by either their doubt or my own fear of it, was what built the thing that eventually spoke for itself. And Britain, I think about Britain a lot when people ask about this. She believed before there was anything concrete to believe in. That kind of witness is its own form of intelligence. The ability to recognize something real before it's legible to the world. I think we owe it to ourselves to find at least one person like that and hold on to them. And I think we owe it to the people around us to try to be that person when we can, instead of waiting for proof before we extend our belief. My father said he should have asked more questions. I think that's right. Not because it would have changed my outcome, I don't know that it would have, but because the asking is the whole point. Curiosity is a form of love. Paying attention is a form of respect. When we withhold those things from the people we're supposed to care about, we don't just fail them in the moment. We build a distance that takes years to cross, if it ever gets crossed at all. I crossed it. We're crossing it. That's the ending I have, and it's enough.